Wendigo. A Wendigo, or Wendigo, is a supernatural being belonging to the spiritual traditions of Algonquian-speaking First Nations in North America. Wendigos are described as powerful monsters that have a desire to kill and eat their victims. In most legends, humans transform into Wendigos because of their greed or weakness. Various indigenous traditions consider Wendigos dangerous because of their thirst for blood and their ability to infect otherwise healthy people or communities with evil. Wendigo legends are essentially cautionary tales about isolation and selfishness, and the importance of community. Definition: according to most Algonquian oral traditions, a Wendigo is a cannibalistic monster that preys on the weak and socially disconnected. In most versions of the legend, a human becomes a Wendigo after his or her spirit is corrupted by greed or weakened by extreme conditions, such as hunger and cold. In other legends, humans become Wendigos when possessed by a prowling spirit during a moment of weakness. Depending on the many First Nations that speak an Algonquian language, including the Abenaki, Siksika, Emakamak, Algonquin, Ojibwe and Innu, the spelling and pronunciation of the word Wendigo differs. Wendigo, Witigo, Windakuk, Winco, Witigo and Witikon are all alternative versions of the same term. Other names, such as Achin, Chimu and Kiwok, are also commonly used to refer to the Wendigo. Appearance and characteristics. Just as there are different versions of the word Wendigo, there are many variations on the creature's appearance and powers. Sometimes, Wendigos are described as exceptionally thin, with the skull and skeleton pushing through its ash-colored, mummy-like skin. Other stories describe the Wendigo as a well-fleshed giant who gets proportionately larger the more it eats. According to other legends, the Wendigo has pointed or animal-like ears with antlers or horns sprouting on its head. A Wendigo's eyes have been described as sunken or glowing like hot coals. Sharp and pointy teeth, extremely bad breath and body odor are also often traits of a Wendigo. The Wendigos usually, but not always, endowed with powers, such as superhuman strength and stamina that allow it to stalk, overpower and devour its victims. Wendigos are usually credited with exceptional eyesight, hearing and sense of smell. They are said to move with the speed of the wind and have the ability to walk across deep snow or even over open water without sinking. According to some legends, Wendigos can be killed with a conventional weapon, such as a club or firearm. Other legends claim that the Wendigo has to be somehow subdued, its icy heart cut out and then melted in a roaring fire. Still other legends claim that only a knowledgeable First Nations spiritual leader, a shaman, can dispatch a Wendigo with a specific spell and ceremony. Origin and history. The Wendigo legend existed in Algonquian oral history for many centuries, long before Europeans arrived in North America. However, the first European written account of a Wendigo was by Paul Lejeune, a Jesuit missionary who lived among the Algonquin people in the early 17th century in what is now Quebec. In a report to his superiors in Paris in 1636, Lejeune wrote, "This devilish woman added that the Wendigo had eaten some Atacamagucan. These are the tribes that live north of the river that is called Three Rivers, and that he would eat a great many more of them if he were not called elsewhere. But that Achin, sort of a werewolf, would come in his place to devour them, even up to the French fort, that he would slaughter the French themselves." Father Lejeune's report demonstrates that 17th century Europeans believed in evil supernatural spirits just as strongly as their First Nations contemporaries. In fact, Father Lejeune's report predates the Salem witch trials by nearly 60 years. Missionaries in what became Canada continued to report legends of the Wendigo until well into the 20th century. Stories could also be found on the western frontier in the 1800s, among Plains Indigenous peoples and employees of the Hudson's Bay Company, HBC. Some HBC traders' records describe encounters with Indigenous spiritual leaders claiming to descend into fits of religious passion. Indigenous peoples often accused these people of being Wendigos. HBC traders sometimes described them as mad. In some cases, community members or relatives of the accused killed the suspected Wendigo as a precaution. In one example, 3 men killed Cree spiritual leader Bishabas after he became greedy and killed an Indigenous family, which led others to believe that he was a Wendigo. Wendigo psychosis. In the early 20th century, the term Wendigo found its way into the Western medical vocabulary. It was used by early psychiatrists to refer to a mental condition in which patients felt possessed by cannibalistic desires. Oblate missionary J. Pendleton was the first to use the term in the 1920s while working in a Cree community in the western James Bay area. There he met a woman who claimed that she saw strangers who wanted to kill and devour her. Pendleton referred to the woman's mental condition as a psychoneurosis, a mental or behavioral disorder characterized by depression and anxiety. Over time, the condition came to be known as the Wendigo psychosis. However, whether this is a real affliction is still a highly disputed discussion among the medical community. Symbolism and meaning. Legends of the Wendigo reveal much about the beliefs, ways of life, social structures and traditions of the people who tell these stories. For some, Wendigo legends serve as reminders of the importance of community, and more importantly, about what can happen when individuals are left outside of the community. One recipe for creating a Wendigo: extreme hunger, cold and isolation were ever-present and threatening facts of life for many First Nations people living in the northern boreal forests. In fact, most Wendigo stories begin with an individual or small group trapped in the wilderness without food, for an extended period, alone and in the cold. Wendigos were said to kill lonely travelers or a member of a group and then take on their personality temporarily, before eventually killing other humans it encountered. Similarly, a Wendigo's legendary greed represented attitudes about sharing in many indigenous cultures. In the wilderness, human survival often depended on communal cooperation and the sharing of food and possessions. Any individual who refused to share local resources, especially in times of great deprivation, was considered a monster. According to historian Sean Smallman, the Wendigo is still seen as a symbol of greed in modern society, as manifested in capitalism and corporate consumerism. The creature has also come to serve as a metaphor for the injustices that Indigenous peoples have faced in Canada, including residential schools, the restriction of rights in the Indian Act, the 60s scoop and similarly assimilative policies. Armand Rovher's film, A Wendigo Tale, 2010, for example, uses the monster to tell a story about the intergenerational trauma of residential schools. For some Indigenous persons, the Wendigo represents the forces of colonization. See also imperialism. In popular culture, unlike the mythological creatures that have been popularized in European culture for centuries, such as vampires and werewolves, Western popular culture has only discovered the Wendigo relatively recently. However, there are now many films, graphic novels, Soft's Curse of the Wendigo, for example, television shows and comics, Marvel's Wendigo, based on tales of the Wendigo. The creature has also inspired artworks by Norval Morrisseau and literary works by Basil H. Johnston, Margaret Atwood, Tom Highway and Joseph Boyden. These new media add to the diversity of the legend and to the ways that it is interpreted by Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples alike. We want to hear from you.